In this lecture, we'll start talking about object-oriented programming by introducing objects and classes. Throughout this course, we're going to be using three different terms a lot. We're going to be using the terms variables, reference variables, and objects. So it's important to understand the difference between these three different terms. So let's first take a look at a variable. So for an example, let's say we consider the statement int x. So what this is saying is we declare x to be an integer variable. Okay, what does that mean again? It means that we are going to allocate memory to store an integer value into some place in the memory. So we set aside some memory and it's going to store an int value. So let's say, for example, we set x to be 45. Then the way we can think of our memory cell as saying, okay, our memory cell is going to store the value 45 and the address associated with it is going to be x. Remember, x is just the name, but it represents the address of where it is in our memory. So if we ever need to use that value, we can just put in the variable x in our code and it will correspond to the value of 45. Now, what about strings? So let's say I have the statement string str. So this is saying that we declare str to be a string variable. And that means, because we're declaring it, we're allocating memory to store a string value. So far, this looks like the same thing as an int variable. But the key difference is for string variables, we cannot directly store data. So str does not store the value of the string. All it can do is store the memory location. So this is saying that str is going to store the memory address that will point us to wherever our string data is. So what this is saying is, let's say I do str equals hello. We would think that we would have something like a memory cell with hello and str as our address, but that's not true for strings. What we have instead are two different memory cells. So this first memory cell over here is saying I have my variable str and it stores a memory address. So here we're just using 1337 as an example. And what that means is the data for str is actually stored in address 1337. And then if I take a look at that address and I look in that memory cell, I would see the string hello being stored there. So what ends up happening is if I say str equals hello, my claim is it actually has the same effect as saying str equals new string with hello in parentheses. So to understand why this is true, we need to take a look at the new operator and see exactly what it does. It actually does three things for us. It allocates memory space for a specific type. So like in this case, we're going to allocate memory space for a string. We're then going to store that data in the memory space. So far it doesn't really sound any different than variables. But this last step is the key difference, where we create the memory, we store data in that memory cell, and then we return the address of that memory space. So it is a new operator, so that means it does return something. So it evaluates to an address that points us to wherever our string data is. So for strings, we do something a little bit different. It's set up where the assignment operator does the same thing. It's not true for variables. It's not true for a lot of different types of objects out there. But Java has made it easier to work with strings by saying the assignment operator does the same thing as the new operator. So what we're doing here is, even though we're saying str equals hello, it's the same thing as saying create a new object that stores the string hello, take its address, and then we store that in str. Because we use string variables in this manner, it's important to note that a string is not a primitive data type. It's not an integer. It's not like a double or a character. This is because it's defined in the string class. So it's not part of the primitive data types. In fact, this is more with what we call a reference variable. So a reference variable is simply a variable that stores a memory address. So using our example from before, str would be a reference variable because it stores the address of wherever hello is being stored. In fact, any variable declared using a class is a reference variable. So from another example, we've done scanner console equals new scanner system.in. Console in this case would be a reference variable because we do new scanner on the right hand side. That creates what we call an object. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. So it allocates memory for our scanner, and then we get the address of that, and that's what gets stored in console. So console is another example of a reference variable. So like I said, any variable that stores a memory address would be a reference variable.